and destroy, but who art thou that judgest thy neighbor? And when we judge incorrectly, we were taking on a job that we were never intended to have. Sometimes judgments are necessary. We all make them. But they always must be based on facts and not feelings or opinions. It also says in the verse 12, who is able to save and to destroy? And the same thought was given by Jesus in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28. And yet there was a reference to God, not to Christ, but it should be noted that Jesus later in the very same gospel said, he sort of depicted himself or represented himself as one who could save and destroy, because he said, come ye blessed, or depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire. So, it seems like in that instance, he was the one that is able to save and to destroy. Anyway, then it goes on to say, who art thou that judgest? And as we said before, there are some types of judgments that Christians must make. But the kind of judging that is forbidden is when we're operating out of just the realm of opinion, or if there's malice along with it, or if there's feelings of superiority, or any of the things, in our judgments. Our judgments can't be harsh. They have to be kind. They have to be trying to understand where the other person's coming from. Someone, I think after class last week, talked to me about the old Indian proverb of walking, in their moccasins, and there's something to that, because I've actually worked with people where I had sort of formed an opinion, whether I should have or not. I had sort of formed an opinion, but then when I actually got across the kitchen table from them, I realized that there was more there that I had understood. Yeah, it's really easy to think that you would do something different, but sometimes it's not quite as easy as all that. A proper view of sin is one that recognizes their own shortcomings first, and then that allows us to better, reflect on the trouble that other people's having, In Matthew chapter 7, verses 3 through 5, Jesus tells us to remove the beam that's in our own eye before we try to remove the mote that's in someone else's eye. And as I studied that, a mote is evidently just a very small thing, like that we get in our eye sometime and we're bothered by it, but it's certainly not a beam, And it's easy to pick on other people, the struggles they have, and not even take the time to reflect on what you might be dealing with. One of the things, as I was studying this, and I'm going to take a slight detour, okay? It's in the context of attitude towards sin. But then I want to talk a little bit about that because of the words Jesus chooses to use. In Luke chapter 18 and verses 9 through 14, I won't read the whole account, but that's where the publican and the Pharisee comes up to pray. And the Pharisees basically gives a discourse on why God is so lucky that the Pharisee's on his side. I do all these things for you, type thing. And the publican's there beating on his chest, he won't even look upward. It says, be merciful to me, a sinner. Now, the interesting thing that I learned about that was Jesus said that the publican, and remember, he's the one beating on his chest and saying he was, be merciful to me, a sinner. He admitted that he had a lot of problems, and Jesus said that he was the one who went back to his home justified. Okay, I got looking into some of that. I remember for many years, I don't know why I didn't look into it more earlier. We throw words around sometimes in religious discussions: justified, justification; sanctified, sanctification. For a lot of years, I sort of knew what it meant. I didn't really look into it. Justified, in the Greek word for that, it's a legal term, and in the spiritual case, it's God declaring a sinner righteous or not guilty. It's really a legal term. The Greek word for a jury, the modern equivalent would be a jury saying you're not guilty. And that's what it is then, irregardless of what it might actually be. I'm reminded way back when, other people might have a different opinion on this than I do. I personally felt like O.J. Simpson was guilty. I thought the evidence pointed to that, and certainly later on, he lost a wrongful death suit to the families. So there was enough evidence to convict him there. But in the court of law, he was not guilty, and that's what it was, irregardless. And it's similar to us. We do things, and we know that we messed up. But when we're baptized, when we repent, God says, in the legal sense, you're not guilty. And I find that to be really pretty profound, and I didn't really understand that for a while. And while we're at it, the word sanctified, there's actually two parts to it. So you have to think of it in two different ways. The word sanctified itself means that God declares us to be holy or set apart for a purpose. That's the idea. Now, the verb part of it, sanctification, that's a process, meaning that we are to, even though we've been declared holy by God, we are supposed to live the rest of our lives becoming ever more holy, ever more, changing from, our past life into a better life. Because let's be real, all of us, I've known some people that made some fairly dramatic changes right upon baptism, but for many people it's a process. Over a period of time you start putting things behind you, and so that's what those words are talking about. And I find that passage of Scripture to be an eye-opening thing. God declares us to be righteous. He declares us to be holy, even though we know ourselves that maybe we haven't got there in our own minds. But in the legal sense, he says, yes, you are. And I find that, to me, that's a comforting thing. Any thought or comment? Any of that? Questions? Yeah, Susan.
Whenever we're looking at the name of, thanks. Satan's name means the accuser, right? That's what the Satan is. Satan means the accuser. And so I think he likes to hold those sins over our head and say, you can't be forgiven of that. You're too wrong. You're too dirty. You can't be forgiven. But like what's awesome about God is he's saying, listen, Christ's blood, that washes you clean. And it's almost, like it's like too good to be true. Really? Like
it does seem like it, don't it?
Yeah. That someone who, has done maybe some really awful things in their life, and in our eyes, we would be like, oh, well, they shouldn't be forgiven of that one. But God still wants to forgive if you repent, if you give your life to him. And so his, God's perspective is way different than people's perspective.
Yeah. The one concept there that, boy, Satan does like to whisper in your ear, don't he? Say, boy, you messed that up. God can't possibly, allow you to go into heaven after that. And that's what Satan would have us believe. But remember, we're talking in a legal sense here. You're not guilty. Even though you are, you're not. You know, we can remember things we've done wrong. God can't. And that's a concept for me, you know. He said, their sins and iniquities I will remember no more. I'm glad that that's the case, because I have some things I'm not that proud of over the years. And I think that's really, you know, eye-opening. The other thing about what he was talking about, it's easy to beat yourself up. Satan wants he wants to steal the joy of your salvation. And he does that by saying, you're not good enough. Don't let him do it. See.
You know, I hear that God can't remember, you know, and I've heard that over and over again. It's not a matter, there's a lot of hyperbole in these things, you know. He's not going to remember it against you. It's not that he forgot it.
Right.
You know, and sometimes we try to take these things literally when it really amounts to God forgives you.
Yes.
And he's not going to hold it against you anymore. It's not that he can't.
He could have, yeah.
It's not that he doesn't remember. It's that he's not remembering it against you.
Correct. I think that's reasonable, yeah. Oh, Big Mike.
I think another thing to add to what Steve was saying is he forgives you of it if you ask for forgiveness. So he looks at that too. Like if he he'll remember it, but he'll remember if you asked for forgiveness and changed, or you just kept on doing it over and over.
Right. Yeah, the key thing there is you have to have a repentant spirit of mind, you know. You're constantly looking for renewing and going back to him and asking for forgiveness. I think that's something we all need to take care of. Other thoughts? Okay. Verse 13. Come now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we shall go into this city and spend a year there and trade and get gain. Oh, the presumptuousness of men. You know, I'm not saying, and James is not saying, that it's okay to think ahead and make plans. But the key thing to remember is to keep God in those plans and understand that you don't control all the things. Like, look at some of the things he says. You know, he says, it starts off with the word tomorrow, you know. That assumes that you'll still be here tomorrow. I've known of situations where people, you know, were driving back from something and never made it. So tomorrow is something that we probably will have. Certainly no guarantees of it. And will we still have good health tomorrow, or would some emergency arise? You know, is there any sickness that's going to come over us? You know, the idea that the man had that James is talking about is tomorrow's a given. I can choose to do with it whatever I want, instead of, you know, the recognition that you don't control all those things. And most of us will have tomorrow, but certainly no guarantee of that. Oh yeah, Roberta.
If God willing, you say, we'll see you tomorrow if God's willing.
Yeah. He goes on to say, we will go into the city, you know, and again, there's more presumptuous to say, okay, the roads are open, Now, there weren't cars back then, but your car will start. Now, I've had a time, Randy and I used to have this thing way back when we were pretty, yeah, that was it. He would call up on the phone. He wouldn't even say who he was, anything. He would just say, ah, like that. And I would know his car broke down again. and that door swung both ways. Sometimes he would come and get me. I mean, we were driving buckets of bolts back then. Oh my. How they ever started, sometimes beyond me. But we didn't have the assumption back then that the car would start. In fact, we had almost the other way. Boy, I hope it does. But notice the presumptuousness in this guy. You know, I'm going to be able to do this. I'm going to go into the city, and it's all going to just work out exactly as I've planned. See, God's nowhere in the mix here in any of this. And he talks about spending a year there. Yeah. How many of us have made plans that a year derailed? Yeah. I mean, I had some pretty grand schemes about what I was going to do in the coming year, and yeah, probably less than 50% of the time it actually worked out the way I had envisioned it. You know, it's so James is talking about presumptuousness. And then he goes on to talk at the man, says, I'm going to engage in trade. Okay, with who? Are you sure? You know, will the goods actually be there? Will they be ruined? You know, there's just so many things. He's making assumptions on a grand level. He's got 100 things there that he didn't take time to think about what could derail all of his plans. And get gain. I've thought I would make money off of things at different times. Sometimes, yes. I flipped houses, and 6 of them I made money, but one I think Chris remembers that one down in that one. In fact, he told me, I don't know if you should buy that. But I had had so many good ones in a row, I got this. Well, what happened, Chris? I didn't have it, did I? And I ended up losing money on that. So you just can't assume things. You have to put God in your picture. Yeah, it is okay to plan ahead. In fact, we should, you know. But we should, you know, take into account that God's in the equation too. And I think our plans sometimes, I think it's good to plan in the sense, because sometimes some young folks, I don't think they do enough life planning. You know, their idea of future plans is, what am I doing Friday night? You know, and that's probably not going to get it either. Oh, Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, I always seem to have a little bit of problem with this. Because then I start questioning my faith, because I sit here and I wonder, you know, oh my gosh, this isn't going to work out. This isn't going to work out. I'm going to do this, and that, and I start planning for the future. And Bill always says, don't worry about it. God will take care of it. And I'm like, yeah, but you still have to plan for whatever may come up, you know. And he's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, babe. You know, and I'm just like, how can you do that? But then I start wondering, okay, am I not trusting God enough?
I heard a good saying on that. Take this for whatever you want. This is why I like this, okay? Someone has said, work like it depends on you, but pray like it depends on God. You know, I think God wants us to, he doesn't just want us to kick back like the Thessalonians did, just kick back and say, yeah, God will fix it. No, he wants us to try to work things out, but at the same time we need to be praying to him, asking him for assistance and wisdom in those decisions. I think it's a both and. I don't think it's an either or. Steve?
In response to Kathy, it seems like if we don't plan something, nothing's going to happen.
Correct.
You know, even though our plans may fail and we might not be able to accomplish them, if we don't do anything, if we don't plan anything, we won't do anything.
Yeah, and sometimes, I agree with that, and sometimes if people don't think things through, they tend to make rash decisions. I mean, all you have to do is look at the credit card debt of America.
Yeah.
People aren't thinking it through.
But in the context of this, I think James is saying you're not autonomous. You know, God is. God, whatever God plans, whatever God says, He will do.
Regardless of what you think.
But you're not that. You know, you can make plans, but there's a lot of things that can interfere with those plans, you know, and in fact, you may not be here, you know, to accomplish that plan. But, you know, we're not autonomous, and we need to consider that, you know, only God is autonomous, and we need to make plans with that in consideration, and remember to keep God in the equation.
I could have said it better myself. I'll leave that stand. Yes.
I think it's important to, if it's your will, I think that has to be put into pretty much every prayer. If it's your will to be done,
I do that.
Then let it be done. And if it's not, He knows if we're going to have it tomorrow, but if it's not His will for us to have it tomorrow, we won't. So I think it's important to know that. And also, I think sometimes we underestimate the devil. And I know personally he can get to you. And I think we just don't realize that
Yeah.
he is out there also. And he's wanting to get to you. And, but yeah, that's all.
Yeah. In fact, I don't recall hardly ever that when the elders meet, that included in the prayer isn't the idea, if God wills, and if He doesn't will something, defeat us in it. You know, because we might not realize that it's not in the context of His will. We don't try to do that, obviously, but I think your point's well taken. I'm going to smack this thing around here. Okay, Katie?
I have several points
Good.
to hit on with everybody here. There's a real good song by the Red Clay Strays called Devil in My Ear, if you haven't listened to it, and I love it. It hits spot on, especially with the raging depression and anxiety that goes on with pretty much all people today. But on Friday, I had my 12-hour shift, and the devil was in my ear all evening the night before because the staffing situation wasn't great. I had, at a base level, we have 3 nurses in our whole department, unless stuff hits the fan and it gets bad, and then we have to call people in. One of the 3 of us was not trained in labor and delivery, so that left 2 of us and our manager out. So it was like, I have an induction today with, praying that, thinking, I wasn't even praying because I was worried so much. The devil's in my ear, and I'm too distracted to even pray about it, that they're not going to send out patients over that I have to deal with on top of the induction. So I get to work on Friday morning, and my sweet friend Becky, she's like, I've been praying all night for you, girl. It's like, well, thank you, because I need it, because I forgot to pray myself, And it ended up the baby wasn't in a good position for them to even start the medication that they were going to do. So we're starting at 0, which I was like, okay, we'll be all right. Now baby's ready. We're head down. We had a beautiful day. It was, like everything that I worried about was it never happened. I had one outpatient that was scheduled at 4 o'clock. My other sweet friend Shani took care of it for me. She was my other labor trained. And at 3 o'clock, the wonderful girl that was there helping us to fill the void had to leave, and then our third nurse that was trained all over the place. Like, so then we had our full staff, and the patient did great. She started to, everything went the way it was supposed to. So here I am, worried all night long, like hardly slept. And I'm thinking, you're an idiot, if you would have just said your prayers like you're supposed to. But, I'm thinking to myself, thank you, Becky, for praying for me, because your prayers were answered. Because I told her that. She texted me. She was back the next night. She's like, how's it going? How's your day? I'm like, it's gone remarkably well. I said, your prayers were answered. Thank you. So that's my story that time.
Your point's well taken, though. There have been different times where we've thought that, bad things were going to happen. I'm reminded of sometimes that my students, where Jill and I teach at a couple studios, giving lessons for guitar, voice, piano, that type thing. And there's recitals that come a couple times a year, and the kids just are fretting to death, sometimes social anxiety and all that type of thing. And I told them, it doesn't really matter if you mess up. Go out and do the best you can, and if you goof up, start over. I said, the people in the audience realize you're younger, and it's okay. I said, I have, as an adult, in the band, and Chris can appreciate this, we've ground to a halt. Because one person started one song and the other person started another. That don't work. And you just literally and I said, you know what, though? The next morning I woke up and had breakfast. So what?
At the end of the shift, everybody alive and well. That's what it could be a terrible day. Everybody's breathing and fine.
Well, that's what I mean. At the end of the day, was it so bad? Yeah. Mike?
About 3 conversations ago, when you were talking, I had a little something to add to it. It's, I've heard, don't pray for a hole and lean on the shovel and expect God to dig it. So you do have to prepare, and you do have to be willing to put the work in.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't want you to just kick back. And certainly we need to pray for things, and he will help us. But he wants us to do our part as well, and I think that matters, Okay, other thoughts, or did I get everybody? Okay, good. And then he answers it in verse 15. For that he ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall both live and do this or that. And I think that's what we've all just been saying here, that God is the ultimate arbiter of what's going to happen. And sometimes it might, I can't help but think of Job. He was a pawn in this big thing between Satan and God. And Job was a mere mortal being moved around on the chessboard. At least it seemed like it. And did he understand all the stuff that was going on? No. And he even talked about wanting to find God. He felt like God had disappeared. He wanted to find him so he could present his case. And to him, it felt like God had just gone. And he talks about, I looked to the north, he wasn't there, to the west, to the south, the east, I couldn't find him. And I think some of us who have been in times of trial can appreciate this when God seems distant, And I'm reminded of that, I don't know, I've seen it on a lot of homes. The one set of footprints, and God, why'd you leave me alone? And he said, that's when I was carrying you. I've seen that. And I think we sometimes just don't realize that. In verse 16, but now ye glory in your vauntings, all such glorying is evil. So what James is saying, that don't get the idea that you control everything. If you think that you're the one managing all the levers, you're wrong, you know? And sometimes people can make these grandiose plans and they're really fooling themselves, you know? They're deceiving themselves about, you know, what they can and cannot do. It's more than just thoughtlessness. It's an arrogance sometimes that we can have, thinking that we have more control than we actually do. Okay? Now in verse 17, now I'll probably only get partway into this because we're almost out of time. Verse 17, to him therefore that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. That verse sometimes concerns me because, and we're going to get into this more next week. Well, actually, not next week. I'll be away next week and going down to see the grandkids. But when I come back, we're going to deal with the idea of sins of omission and commission. And one of the things I'll let you with just for now is when God or when Christ was walking the earth, look at how he dealt with people. Look at the stories he told and all that. He didn't go around really talking about things like, now you Jews, you need to stop drinking. They knew that. And the Jews, a lot of them, and I didn't realize till Steve pointed it out to me one time, it's easy to say that the Jews were these bad people. A lot of them probably knew their scriptures better than we do, huh? Yeah, they did. You know, they studied the Old Testament scriptures. They were mistaken about some things, you know, and they had been taught from their leaders the idea that the return of Jesus would mean, you know, the glory days of Solomon coming back, and that's what they thought. But they were good people in some respects. So he expected them to know about not cursing, not drinking, all that. Look at the parables. What was he telling people? Like the parable, you know, of the rich man and Lazarus? It wasn't that he was evil so much. It's just that he didn't do good when it was right there for him to do it. And I think, you know, one of the things I worry about a lot, you know, for in the church and myself, is we have to worry about the idea of, are we looking out for our fellow man? Are we concerned about lost souls enough? I think that stuff matters. I really think it matters. Okay, I will take up there and really dive into that next week, or the week after, sorry.